So this House versus NCAA, this House committee versus the NCAA,
yes. Great transition.
where they're seeking, they want back pay for Division I college athletes who are barred from earning name, image, and likeness compensation.
Yeah.
You guys going to get a cut or what? I mean, what kind of check are you guys going to get?
I'm not getting it.
We don't get anything from this. We've actually already said this to you.
Oh, wait a second. You mean to tell me that
here we go,
Brady Quinn, who had T-shirts that said that he made himself.
You bring this up every time. This has nothing.
It was a great idea.
Nothing to do with this.
You marketed this. You put these T-shirts out, and you haven't seen a dime for the shirt. I would sin for Quinn and LaVar Arrington with the lead
for Quinn.
Like, you guys can't get a cut of this $1 billion that's going to go back to athletes, and then how are they divvying this up?
It's more than that. It's $2.7 billion.
Do quarterbacks get more than like linemen? Like, how's this going to be split up between them? The way this.
All right, let's just go over the facts before we let Jonas just steer us into a ditch here. It appears the House versus the NCAA, they're about ready to come to a settlement. And what that means would be this. The NCAA would pay back $2.7 billion, it's a little over that, in back damages over the course of the next 10 years. $1.6 billion of that would come from reductions to NCAA distributions, which obviously the NCAA every year distributes money out for media rights, which mostly come from the tournament, things of that nature. But 60% would be coming from the group of 5 institutions, and the other 40% will be coming from the power conferences. However, that could potentially change. D2, D3 are not a part of this. And then there's another $1.1 billion of the 2.7 that will be coming from NCAA reserves, which will come via the reserves, budget cuts, and other sources. Now, if they don't settle and they let this thing play itself out, there's a court date coming in January 2025. And if House, in this case, was able to win versus the NCAA, which I'll put it this way. Everyone's won versus the NCAA. Basically, every lawsuit that comes up, the NCAA loses. So it would be smart probably for the NCAA to settle and for the parties, or the powers that be, to come together and make a settlement from this. Because usually they pay triple in the award of a settlement. And if the NCAA was to reject this settlement, it could be as high as $20 billion in back damages. Jeez. Which would probably bankrupt the NCAA. So look, as of now, the rev share with athletes, at least from this model, what we're seeing is going to be somewhere between 15 to 25 million per year, but there's not specifics to who gets paid. So, for example, revenue-generating sports, football, men's, women's basketball, that's pretty much it. You know, are they the only ones getting paid? Are all student athletes getting paid? How does this work? There will most likely no longer be there'll be a cap on the roster, but there will not be a scholarship limitation. Meaning, if you want, for even other sports outside of football, like football might be, it'll be 85 and they'll keep it at 85. But for some other sports like lacrosse, you could have 30 scholarship players if you want. So there's that potential. We still don't know how collectives will be involved. We do know there'll be greater scrutiny against those collectives. They could be instrumental in helping student athletes get paid, a kind of a conduit to student athletes getting paid, and they might not. And then the last thing is, that's probably most important, is Title IX. It's still a big question mark, and it's not clear who's fighting for Title IX, which, if you recall, it provides equal scholarships to both men's and women's sports. Yeah. And so it becomes difficult to know how this will impact Title IX. And if, for example, women's sports will be impacted by all of this, depending on whatever settlements come to. So, look, all this stuff is still potentially subject to more litigation, but if the federal government provides protections to the NCAA after this settlement takes place, which I believe is why some of it's being dragged out, that and the fact that some of the conferences aren't completely on board with this, and it does have to go to a vote. But we're at a point now where there's starting to be more structure to at least student athletes getting paid at the college sports ranks.
It's still not enough. There definitely needs to be some more governing and more rules put in place, because it's still the wild, wild west. The NIL has made college athletics and high school athletics and youth athletics the wild, wild west. And so to me, looking at something like this taking place, the sooner these operations are legally able to come in-house to the institution, to the university, I think the better off college sports will be. That's what I think. You know?
I don't disagree with that. I think it still lends itself to the question of who's going to oversee it and punish the schools for doing so.
Yeah.
You know, is the NCAA then going to, punish an SEC school? Let's just, kind of say what we're all probably thinking. Are they going to punish an SEC school if they happen to be bending the rules within that NIL space outside of what rev share those athletes are getting?
Why is it got to be an SEC school?
It just feels like they're usually the ones that get popped more often than not. Yeah. How about this? Well, let's say it's a Big Ten school. We'll say it's a Big Ten school because the Big Ten actually generated more revenue last year in 2023 than the SEC did. So let's say the Big Ten, because the Big Ten's got more money than the SEC. But let's say a Big Ten school does. Who's ultimately going to punish them for that, and what's the punishment going to be? I mean, those are all questions we still don't know at this point. We don't know, for example, if collectives exist. Do the schools take them in-house? Do they exist at an arm's length away, but having to be subject to some sort of law or some sort of governance by a third party, whoever that may be? There's a lot of questions that, at least based on the reporting we've got now, and if you're looking for someone to follow, Ross Dellinger has done an unbelievable job documenting the progress that has been made at this point. So
up top, Ross.
He'd be a great person to follow to get a better sense of where this is all going. But again, this is just the beginning. It's not the end. I think this will be challenged. Even with this agreement, there'll probably be someone who challenges this settlement when it's all said and done.
I can't wait for it to all be over. I can't wait for it. Just get over it so we can just focus on football and get back to.
There's not going to be a lot of getting over for a while, bro. There's going to be so much more that has to be developed and infrastructurally speaking, and how does it apply? And how does all of those things work?
Yeah.
And is that union with all college athletes? Is it by conference? Is it by school? How is all of it? There's so much infrastructure that's going to need to be in place to manage this the right way.
I think one of the misnomers, too, in all of this is basically through this settlement, it would provide schools with protection, and the student athletes would still be deemed students, not employees. And the reason why that's important is when you start throwing the term employee around on them, I think there's some student athletes that don't want to be that, by the way, in part because I don't think they're ready for or don't want to have to necessarily have a job, even though it feels like everything they're doing is a job. But I think not that it complicates things further with the university, but it definitely changes the relationship, right? With your school once they become an employer. And I think there's a thought that this particular settlement and the powers that be that are trying to work on negotiating the settlement are trying to work with the federal government to get protection so that student athletes are viewed as still students, not employees. And because, to your point, LaVar, not that this changes much. They'll still probably have to unionize. They'll still probably have to have a collective bargaining agreement. But the relationship between universities and the student athletes that are there, because I think there is still a thought that the student component should matter, getting a degree should matter, all those things, which I do agree. I know not everyone does, but I think getting your education at that formidable part of your life is still really important. But there is a thought that, not changing that relationship to have to put a school in the position of firing kids and all that, even though it kind of happens now, right? Especially if you look at Colorado and what's going on between their roster. They're going to have the most roster turnover again for the second year in a row. It's kind of already happening, but you'd like to think that there's still some development. There's still some sense of the university is helping to kind of grow these young people and help them out. And when it's when you're an employee, it feels a little more cutthroat, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And then there's the idea of representation.
Yeah.
And how is that going to be handled? you're going to have guys. You have guys now who are being advised by their agents. They're being guided by their agencies, and you're hearing about it, and possible transferring, different things like that. The leveraging of bowl games or important games, like I'm just going to sit out and go into the transfer portal. Like you're now hearing the influence of, and which I feel like it's mucky and messy with pro players. Yeah. Now these agents are attaching themselves, and these agencies are attaching themselves to college players, and now even at some points even high school players. Yeah. For football, I mean, basketball and baseball, other sports, it's been around, but it's definitely a brave new world as it applies to the football space and how that's going to be handled and how that's represented, what that looks like, because there is no real governing of it right now, if you ask me.
It's why I've always wondered why the NFLPA or even Major League Baseball, the NBA, why they don't take. I mean, I guess the NBA in a way with the G League has realized that there needs to be some sort of mechanism or opportunity for players who come out of high school, don't want to go to college, and go to the G League, right, and get your development there, focus on that there, to then get to the pros. And I've always wondered why the NFLPA wouldn't want to take a more active approach in helping to create whatever unionization there could be at the college level, only in the aspect of this is your minor leagues. This is where you're getting your talent pool from. If you want to, we talked yesterday about the whole GLA, right? Yeah. And the group licensing agreement, and how, when we're coming out, we're kind of unaware of it, having to educate ourselves on it. And, now it's a little different because a lot of the players are signing deals in college. And so maybe they're better educated on some of these topics, but I think it would be helpful for the NFLPA to invest their time in, not resources, but at least consulting in whatever comes from this formation in this new world of college sports, and say, look, help us, let's create something that helps the transition for these players, because this is ultimately where they're trying to get to. And when we can create what we've done, at least a foundation for you to work off of, and from there, at least you've got the frameworks in place that you could have a union and you could have representation. We'll teach you how to work with these agents and how to make sure these agents are certified and all those things that the NFLPA currently does.
Yeah. I feel like the school should have to hold a large responsibility for that infrastructure as it applies to educating these kids on what this looks like, how they can be successful as student athletes, because that's still what they are. If we're going to pretend that that's what it's something different, then that is what it is. But these guys have a lot of things these athletes have a lot of things that they got to do, and it'll be interesting to see how much the school uses their resources to be able to support these kids as this NIL space continues to evolve and develop.
Well, good luck with all that. Hawaii, Delaware State, a little over 3 months away.